Welcome. I am Jeff Braun, Senior Minister of Winnetka Congregational Church, an open-minded, open-hearted, non-denominational Christian church serving Chicago's broader North Shore. I am pleased to be talking today to a longtime member of Winnetka Congregational Church, LeAnn Pope, about her spiritual journey and about a salient thread in that journey, namely her work to better understand the realities and the complexities of systemic racism. LeAnn's spiritual journey inspired her to leave a successful career as an attorney and litigator so as to pursue a decidedly different path. One that led her to divinity school, specifically to seminary, where she recently completed her Master of Theology at Garrett Theological Seminary here in Evanston, Illinois. LeAnn's master's thesis was entitled, From Colorblind to Clearer Vision, a white Christian's unexpected journey toward redemption. The recording of this interview and LeAnn's master's thesis will be shared electronically tomorrow, October 7th. And together they will serve as the basis for our live spiritual enrichment sessions on Sunday, October 11 and Sunday, October 18 from 8:45 a.m. to 9:45 a.m., to which all are invited. Welcome, LeAnn, and what a pleasure it is to be with you this morning.
Thank you, Jeff, and it really is a pleasure to be here with all of you. Thank you for taking the time to be here and to be part of our very important conversation.
Amen. So grateful for the chance to be in conversation. Our greatest challenge is going to be to keep it within that 30 to 35 minutes, knowing how rich the vein of this topic is and how deep your personal insights are and how fruitful they will be for all of us as we are on this journey together, but as individuals as well. And so, LeAnn, we have some great questions this morning. And as a way to dive right into those, but to create important backdrop for those, I wonder if you might start by just stepping back, helping us to step back and summarize this spiritual journey and helping us to understand this sense of call that clearly developed and became more and more focused as you leaned into it.
Thank you, Jeff. I'll be happy to do that. And I have to admit, oftentimes it's hard for me to go back 5 years.
Yes.
Because the thought process I had 5 years ago truly is foreign to me today, but I will do my best. So this journey started in 2014. And it's going to sound familiar to all of us with with the events that have happened this summer. But my journey started in 2014 after the murder of Michael Braun and the riots in Ferguson. I'll never forget this. I was getting ready for work in the morning, and I always had the TV on as I was getting ready for work, and CNN was on, and I saw the videos of the riots, of the violence in Ferguson. And I couldn't believe what I was seeing, that this was going on in our country. I was deeply moved by it. I was deeply disturbed by it. Next then came the events in Baltimore with following the death of Freddie Gray. This had similarities with what was going on in Ferguson, but for me personally, it was a little different. What bothered me, believe it or not, was watching the peaceful protests of the killing of Black men by white police officers, because the protesters were blaming the killing of the Black men on racism, and I saw the problem as just bad cops that need to be fired. And so I was wrestling with the images on the videos of the signs of protest. I was wrestling with, why are all these people so angry? Why are these kids so angry? And why aren't they in school? And why aren't they working? I had all these questions going around in my head, deeply disturbed by these images. At that time, my view of race and racism was that since the Civil Rights Act, we have moved into a post-racial country. That white supremacy has not been the staple of our culture since 1964. I believe that firmly. And as a lawyer and having defended discrimination claims against large financial institutions by classes of plaintiffs, I knew that we had laws that prohibited discrimination in housing and in fair credit. So the laws are there. We have gotten rid of the laws. We certainly came out of Jim Crow, came out of slavery, but now we have the Civil Rights Act. Our laws are in place. So my belief was, because those laws are in place, post-Civil Rights Act, all you needed to do to have equal opportunity was to work for it, just like I have had to work for it. So that was my mindset at the time. At about this same time, now we're moving into early 2015, I was starting to think personally about how I wanted to spend the rest of my life professionally. I was moving toward my 60s. I had been a successful litigation attorney for over 30 years in Chicago. And I'm sure some folks will resonate with what I'm about to say. Despite all the success, despite the good feelings that comes from that success, there came a point in my life where I realized that my success depended upon winning cases. It depended upon how much business I was going to bring into the firm. In other words, money. My success as a lawyer was defined by clients and by other attorneys, by how much money I brought into the firm, and by win after win after win. And you know what? That gets tiring. It gets exhausting. And when you get to be my age at that time, you start wondering, is there more to life? Should I be doing more? And I got to that point in the spring of 2015. I walked into my corner office one Monday morning and really decided, it's a beautiful office, by the way. I did not want to die being a lawyer. I know that sounds a bit morbid, but that's not where I wanted to die. I wanted to do something more. My dad's a Lutheran pastor, was a Lutheran pastor. I was raised in the church, and I always had it in my mind that I wanted to go to seminary. So I decided to take a bold, courageous move and leave the security that I had known for years, and I left my profession. I retired from the law firm, much to the surprise of my partners. And within several months later, I was gone, walked out of the law firm for the last time. I enrolled at Garrett Theological Seminary. I wasn't sure where this journey was going to lead, but I felt pretty profoundly moved by the racial tension in this country. I knew that I wanted somehow to be an agent for change, and I knew somehow that my theological training would help me do that. Now, when I got to Garrett, not surprisingly, I had a plan for how I was going to be God's agent for change. My plan.
We all have the plan, and God laughs, right?
Exactly. So my plan was I was going to do an internship at an African-American church. And once I was completely enmeshed into the Black church culture, I would understand more about that culture. I was going to come back to my white church, and then I was going to be a bridge builder between the white church and the Black church. Because of I was raised in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Unfortunately, Kenosha's gotten the bad publicity lately, but I grew up in a predominantly Black neighborhood, my grade school and junior high. So I have always felt comfortable in the Black circles and in white circles. So I thought I was perfect to do this work. I'm going to bridge the gap between the white and Black communities. That plan, though, quickly changed when I started working with an organization called CRED, Create Real Economic Destiny. And it is an organization in Chicago whose mission is to have a transformational change over Chicago's gun violence. Every Monday, I would drive to one of the most violent neighborhoods on the south side of Chicago, and I would meet with young men who were in the program who wanted to get off the street. These were the young men, African-American men, ages 19 to 24, who were most at risk for shooting or being shot. These were the guys that were involved in the street life for several years. When I started driving to the neighborhood, Jeff, I'll never forget the first time I got off the expressway and took the exit to Roseland, which is where I go and still go. I couldn't believe all the litter. I've never seen so much litter before. That litter's not up where I live on the North Shore. And as I pulled off into the street and started driving further south, I realized there's no grocery stores. There were no banks. There was a convenience store. There were lots of churches. There were lots of liquor stores. But I was so struck by the lack of economic opportunity in this neighborhood. So I'm meeting with these young men on a weekly basis. And then it started slowly to hit me. Why is this neighborhood all Black? Why is it poor? And why are the neighborhoods in Chicago, and we know Chicago is one of the most segregated cities in the country. Why is it that way? Why is it segregated? Why are my new friends on the South Side, why are they being raised with gun violence? Why are they being raised without food sources, without good education? And I did what most lawyers do then when they're faced with an issue that they don't have an answer to. I started literally doing a deep dive in researching. What is race? How did it get created? How did the segregation come to be in Chicago? And what is white supremacy? And does it really still exist today? This research took years to do. And it was because of that research that I started, that my worldview and my vision slowly, completely began to change my own views of race and racism.
LeAnn, so appreciate you framing it that way for all of us. And it is a very obviously powerful personal story, and one in which vision, which you were just talking about toward the end of your remarks, is such an important part. It's not just a word, it really is a lens to understand what you experienced and what you started to feel drawn toward. And the questions that then came clear in your mind, and questions even beyond those. I want to talk to you about vision for a second, actually have you talk about vision, because the name of your master's thesis, the title of that thesis, is so telling. From colorblind to clearer vision. For so long, being colorblind seemed to be the ultimate aspiration when it came to matters of race or racism. I don't even see someone else's color. I see their heart. That seemed to have been, rightly or wrongly, the aspiration to get to colorblindness. You clearly, in your thesis title and in the work that inspired it, and this research you've done in your transformation, have moved from that understanding of colorblindness as something to be aspired to something very different. Can you talk about what your feelings are about colorblindness and what makes for this clearer vision?
Yeah, I can. And I was raised, as many of us were raised, to believe that all people are God's children, that we are all created equal in the eyes of God and in the eyes of the law since 1964. My home was not a home where I heard any racist tropes. As I said, my dad was a Lutheran pastor. My parents were very open-minded. I proudly considered myself to be colorblind. And I did so up until I started school at Garrett. And let me tell you what I meant by colorblind. When you're colorblind, it's like a badge of honor. Because when you say you're colorblind, you're saying that, as you said, Jeff, you see people's heart, not the color of their skin. And when white folks like me say we're colorblind, what we are really saying is, because we're the ones that are colorblind, we're really not responsible for the racism that exists today. It is the problem of those people who see color. And those people who see color are the scary, mean white supremacists, mostly from the South, but now we're seeing them come out from under the rocks in the North too. So being colorblind was like my bastion of being safe, because it upheld me as an upstanding person who saw the humanity in everyone. Wow. You know, I wish I could pinpoint for you when this hit me of how wrong I was, because when it did, it was like a lightning bolt. When I realized that to say I'm colorblind, that means when I see my beautiful Black sister, I don't see the color of her skin. How can I erase her like that? That's what I was saying. And when I say I'm colorblind, I don't see your beautiful color skin, that also means that I'm not seeing the pain you have had to live with in your life because of the color of your skin. And Jeff, the reason I'm able to say that is I have never experienced that pain because of the color of my skin. So again, it allowed me this colorblind mentality of feeling safe. I'm not a racist. It's not my responsibility. But I think I can be an agent of change because I'm one of these neutral people who can just move among both Blacks and whites and bring everybody together. That was so profoundly wrong on my part because there is nothing neutral about me. The fact that I saw myself as colorblind, the fact that I consider myself neutral was my own way of refusing to deal with the issues like, why is the South Side of Chicago all Black? Why is it poor? It allowed me to escape my own responsibility for doing the hard work that I truly believe in my heart that we all need to do, to see the humanity in everyone. And humanity means the color of our skin. It means the beautiful color of all of our skins. And I am no longer going to erase somebody's identity by erasing the color of their skin.
It's a powerful evolution and a correction, again, of something that on the surface seemed so positive. And really, as you've come to explain it so beautifully, and thank you for that, color blindness really is issue blindness. It's humanity denying, it's opportunity blindness. And the issue is what allows us to see what the opportunity is. Where things are wrong is what prompts us to look toward how we can set them right. And so I appreciate you sharing what is obviously a very complex and deep understanding in such a distilled way. And I think it's helpful for all of us, for me as well, to hear that language and that conversion from one aspiration to a much clearer and a much harder one, a much more self-reflecting one, as you have so clearly noted. LeAnn, for those who do identify as white and those who are seeking to address the nexus of all these issues, these realities, which are so knotted up, so tied up in systemic racism. And to say it's systemic doesn't mean it doesn't have personal relevance or that we don't have personal reflection to do. It's not just out there, but it is broader than just each of us or any one of us. Often that work, it's very hard work. It's self-reflecting work, self-checking work. Often that can evoke a sense of guilt, of white guilt. And I'm wondering how you might talk about how you perhaps experienced that yourself or saw and came to understand what that guilt is really about and how working through it is important so we can really get to our goal, which is to address racism, not just walk around it. Can you talk about guilt?
Yeah, I can. Guilt, I can. I'm not going to tell you what first comes to my mind because the conversation would become very short. And what I would say to you is I don't deal in guilt anymore because it typically will cut off the conversation. And let me tell you what I mean by that.
Please.
Early in this journey and during my research, I'll never forget the first book that I read is called Dear White Christian. Very first book I read on race, racism. I got to the chapter entitled White Supremacy. I mean, that was a trigger word for me. I am not a white supremacist. Again, my mindset was racism relates to individual conduct by bad people. I am not a bad person. Therefore, this chapter on white supremacy doesn't relate to my work of being a change agent for God's people. I put it down. And Jeff, I put it down because, in all honesty, it was hard for me to read. I I would cringe at the term white supremacy, white oppression. I don't oppress anybody. That was hard for me to hear. But only when I started to understand better that, yes, racism is about individual conduct, but it is about so much more than that. And that's where this term systemic racism comes into play, which I didn't even hear until I got to Garrett. It forced me to come out of my own little silo of thinking that racism is only something that bad people do, and to look broader at the world to see how the culture of whiteness in this country, and I'm only talking about the US, I've not studied anywhere else, how the culture of whiteness has so permeated everything we have done since the first enslaved people were brought over in 1619. And in 2020, my white mind is still stuck in whiteness. And what does that mean? And this is where the guilt comes in. I'll never forget the first time a professor said to me, "LeAnn, I want you to Google the terms whiteness and pedagogy, the teaching of whiteness." I didn't know what whiteness was. More academics using big terms with me. I hated that. When I went back to my office and sat here and Googled what is whiteness, blew me away. This study of whiteness has been around all the time that I was practicing law and raising 2 kids. So this is not new, but what it is it's academics and others coming together and taking a good hard look at our culture and our society and say, how did we get to where we are today? And when they define that, they say, and think about this, Jeff, everything that we have done as white folks, everything revolves around the white culture, how we dress, how we talk. We set the rules. And then there's people, think of it as a circle, and there's a bunch of white folks in the middle of the circle. Then you've got the people, the others outside the circle that want to get in. And what does it mean to get in? That means you get access to resources, access to commerce, access to education, access to power. They want in to have access to power. So this whole center of whiteness is really hard to wrap your mind around. And that's where the white guilt comes into play. Wait a minute. I am not a part of that. Once again, I didn't do anything to create this center of whiteness. I have always had an open heart and open mind. Yeah. The problem with the guilt is, though, if you start thinking, I feel so guilty about slavery, I feel so guilty about Jim Crow, I feel so guilty about the terror that we have put Black bodies through for generations. What does that do then to our white psyche as we are sitting in our white space? We shut down. We shut down because my family didn't own slaves, so it's not really my problem. And this whole thing about guilt can paralyze us. And what I have said to other folks is that it took me a long time to get out of that paralysis. And if you find that you are weighed down by the guilt, by the tears, by the white fragility, let yourself sit there for a while. Let yourself sit there for a while. But please give yourself the grace and the opportunity to lift yourself up from the guilt, because that's where the clearer vision comes in. Jeff, once you lift yourself up out of this feeling of guilt and you put yourself aside, and for the first time, you start to see your world through the eyes of our Black brothers and sisters. Mm-hmm. And when you do that, that's when you see how everything is so white in our culture. From the books that we read growing up, to the people in the commercials, to the people in the magazines, everything is white. And that's what we have to start breaking down as our responsibility as white folks.
Mm-hmm. LeAnn, guilt is one of the emotions, and an incredibly powerful and miring emotion, as you have just so aptly described it. True for you, true for others who may be engaging this topic. Any difficult topic will more likely than not, involve levels of resistance. A temptation to, as you said, put the book down when the words on the page, quote unquote, didn't match you. Though perhaps they spoke to each of us more than we want to admit. The idea of, I don't deserve to feel guilty. What do I have to be guilty about? After all, I'm a good person. All these are perfectly fair things to be said. They just miss that broader context we're trying to create. Resistance is going to be part of any soulful work, any reconciling work, any redemptive work, whether in a Christian or non-Christian context. Can you talk a little bit more about how you experience, other ways in which you experience resistance to, and how you moved through that resistance, and how that might help us as we think about our personal journeys as it relates to engaging this topic of systemic racism?
Yeah, I think the thing that was most helpful to me is when I finally realized it is not a sin to be white.
Mm-hmm.
God made me white as God made the colors of all the other beautiful skin in this world. And I was no longer going to feel guilty because I'm the white dominant culture. And what it is, racism is just our form of caste system in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And because I'm part of the dominant caste, once I took the position that while I cannot change the past, I can be responsible for the future.
Mm-hmm.
And when I started seeing that I had agency, I had the ability to change the way our culture has been for generations, that gave me hope. It gave me the ability to push past the resistance.
Mm-hmm.
And it helped me get to a place. And Jeff, this is where theology comes in.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what really pushed me. There are a lot of good people doing anti-racist work. And there's a lot of good people who are of different faith, no faith. This is important work for all of us to do together. But Jeff, what really propelled me, and this is where the resistance comes in, when I was feeling uncomfortable in doing this, I can't tell you how the hours I sat at this desk doing this, because if I was resisting, it was hard. And how do you get to a place when you're my age and realize you've been wrong all those years? I'm sorry, not many of us like to admit they've been wrong. So this was tough work. But then it's the theology. Mm-hmm. Once I realized that I have the power to help change this culture of whiteness, of white dominance, to help rid our minds of the cycles, the tropes that have been going on in our minds subconsciously for generations. Once that gave me power, then I realized that as a Christian, I now have no choice. And I know that sounds wrong, Jeff, but you know how passionately I feel about this. If I am a follower of Jesus Christ, I can no longer do this. Yeah. Because I'm not a follower of Jesus Christ. And so it is my theology, it is my faith that will not let me stop. Mm-hmm. I hear the Old Testament story of Genesis with Cain and Abel. And, where God says Cain killed Abel, right? Cain killed Abel. And God says, after Cain killed Abel. You know, God, what have you done? What have you done to him? And Cain said, well, who am I? My brother's keeper? Am I my brother's keeper? Oh, Jeff, you better believe we're our brother's keeper.
Yeah.
You better believe we're our brother's keeper. And the culture that we have helped to create, this culture of caste, of white privilege, of white supremacy, I'm going to say the words, and I have to keep saying them because they still make me uncomfortable. We have an obligation as white Christians to take this burden off the back of our Black brothers and sisters. We are our brother's keeper.
And to remove knowing that if we were to think about how our being, academics like to say ontology, right, is collective, it's interconnected, inseparably interconnected. To seek to redress issues that we have created that ripple out from us is also to release us, to liberate us. It is impossible to be about the work of liberation and not be personally invested, and it is impossible to help someone else lift up from false and unjust oppression without also being liberated. And to think in terms of either or, that's their problem, his problem, her problem, not my problem, is a false binary when we couch it in theological terms. As we wrap up, LeAnn, and knowing there is so much more that we want to cover and we will cover in our Sunday morning conversations, which are live conversations, the chance for everyone involved to be able to be in conversation with you and to thread our stories together as we look at this important issue, which is part of the church's work. I wanted to ask as we wrap up, how has your view of Christ, your view of Jesus, shifted or sharpened as a result of this journey from colorblind to clearer vision? And making a note that our vision is always getting clearer. It's never ultimately clarified. It's always getting clearer. But has Jesus, has your view of him shifted or sharpened in this process? And I wonder if we could just end on your reflection, how?
Okay, so as you probably know, seminary tears down your faith, completely breaks it down. I remember running out to my car one day, and I typically don't cry very much, but just breaking down into tears. I thought, what have I done? I had my safe faith practices and my safe belief and my safe religion for years.
Yeah.
And then I started, what a concept, I actually started to read the Bible. They make you do that in seminary. You have to read the Bible.
They get out the owner's manual, right?
Yeah, exactly. And for the first time, Jeff, I got introduced not to Christ. I felt I knew Christ. I got introduced to Jesus of Nazareth. I got introduced to the rebel who refused to take as normal what was happening to his people and other people who were not seen as human. Their humanity was completely stripped from them. And when I saw what Jesus did, and when I saw that his message is to restore humanity to all people, my relationship and my view of Jesus has profoundly changed. I have to stop because I'm going to start crying. I'm not going to cry.
Well, as those of among us who know me would say, you know, crying's a good thing. The sign of the living waters, our truth rising to the surface. But we will not force you to cry or lead you to cry at this moment. We will say thank you, LeAnn, for this opening arc in what will be a broader and multi-part conversation. We will say, bless you for your willingness to share with such candor and such care and such compassion for this broader work, anti-racism work, and your understanding of how that fits within the work of the church. It's certainly not a purely Christian job to be addressing this important issue. This relational work spans all the great faiths and those who do not identify as religious, but to house it as you do and to ground it as you have in your faith, your understanding of Christ, Jesus of Nazareth, the rebel. is so important. And we thank you for what is a beautiful opening arc in these conversations. Again, we remind anyone watching that they can join us on Sunday morning, October 11th and 18th from 8:45 a.m. to 9:45 a.m. And that's simply signing in through our Zoom link, which you can get if you need it by calling our church office or by accessing that through our weekly electronic newsletter called The Messenger. And we are excited, LeAnn, to pick up this conversation, and we encourage all who will be participating to read your thesis in its entirety. It is a riveting and a powerful, and what's more, a provocative and the most productive way read. And so again, we thank you, LeAnn, and we hope everyone will join us on Sunday, October 11th and 18th. Thank you, LeAnn.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you.
You're welcome.